The music was loud enough to make the crystal glasses tremble on the kitchen island, but not loud enough to drown out the words that shattered my life in a single breath. The house was packed. Laughter drifted through every room like smoke. People moved between the living room and the back patio with drinks in hand, clapping me on the back and congratulating me on the promotion I'd spent 8 years killing myself to earn. Our house, our celebration, our friends. I was standing near the bar, finishing a conversation with a colleague, when I heard her voice cut through the noise. Yes, we're sleeping together. Everything in the room seemed to freeze. I turned slowly. There, near the staircase, was my wife, Sophia. Her cheeks were flushed, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand, her eyes bright with the reckless courage of someone who had already decided to burn everything down. Beside her stood Julian Kane. I knew him too well. He'd been coming to our house for 2 years, a colleague from Sophia's design firm. Charming, confident, the kind of man who made people feel small without even trying. The kind of man I'd once handed a drink to while saying, "Make yourself at home." Sophia pointed straight at me. "Yes," she said louder, her voice ringing across the stunned silence. "We're sleeping together, and he's better than you." Someone gasped. A nervous whisper rippled through the crowd, but Sophia wasn't done. "If you have any pride left," she said coldly, staring me dead in the eyes, "you should leave." The silence that followed was heavier than her words. For a moment I just stood there, strangely calm. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of late nights, sacrificed vacations, and the quiet belief that I was building something real. In one drunken moment, she had ripped the foundation out from under all of it. I looked around the room. Most people wouldn't meet my eyes. Julian just stood there with one hand in his pocket and the faintest smirk on his face, like he'd already won the game. I studied Sophia's face, the woman I had loved, protected, and provided for. There was no remorse, only irritation that I was still standing in her way. I set my glass down carefully on the counter. Then, I walked forward. The crowd parted for me without a word. My footsteps on the hardwood were the only sound in the house. I didn't stop to argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even raise my voice. When I reached the front door, I paused just long enough to look back once. Sophia was still standing in the same spot, chin lifted, daring me to make a scene. I said nothing. I opened the door, stepped into the cool night air, and closed it quietly behind me. The party started up again before I even reached the end of the driveway. Someone laughed too loudly. The music swelled. But I already knew something none of them did. The house they were celebrating in wasn't really hers. And by morning, everything she thought she owned was going to start slipping through her fingers. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of the home I had spent years building. Then, I drove away. I drove for 20 minutes with no destination before pulling into a quiet parking lot overlooking the river. I killed the engine and finally let myself breathe. The pain came in waves, but underneath it was something colder and clearer. Not rage, not even revenge, just clarity. My phone started buzzing, again and again. 6 missed calls, 3 messages from Sophia. "Where did you go? You embarrassed me tonight. Come back so we can talk. Logan, something weird just happened." I stared at that last one for a long time before putting the phone down. She had no idea. 2 years ago, when Sophia demanded we buy that modern house on Hawthorne Ridge, I had agreed, but only on one condition. The property was purchased through a holding company I had quietly set up for my consulting business. On paper, the house didn't belong to me, and it sure as hell didn't belong to her. It belonged to Hale Strategic Holdings, a company where I was the sole director. It had been nothing more than smart financial planning at the time. Tonight, it became something else entirely. I later learned how quickly things unraveled after I left. The knock at the door came while the party was still limping along. Julian answered it, still playing the role of the man who had just conquered the house. On the porch stood two men in dark suits, and a woman holding a tablet. They introduced themselves as representatives from Hale Strategic Holdings. I'm told Sophia's face went pale the moment they mentioned the conditional occupancy agreement, and informed her that I had terminated her right to live there. The woman turned the tablet around. My digital signature was on the document, time-stamped 30 minutes after I left the party. You have until noon tomorrow to vacate the property, the man said calmly. The party died right there. Guests started slipping out without saying goodbye. Julian's confident mask cracked as he realized the prize he thought he'd claimed came with an eviction notice. Sophia stood in the middle of it all, finally understanding that the man she had humiliated didn't need to raise his voice. He had simply walked away, taking the entire foundation of her world with him. Hours later, as I sat watching the river, my phone buzzed one last time. Please come back. I read the 3 words, then set the phone face down on the passenger seat. Some things, once broken in front of a room full of people, can never be repaired. And tonight, Sophia hadn't just ended our marriage. She had destroyed the only person who had been quietly holding her entire world together. That night taught me that real power isn't in shouting, it's in staying calm and walking away with dignity. I didn't beg. I simply removed myself from someone who no longer valued me, and I let the consequences do the talking. If this story hit home for you, like it and share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below. Do you think I made the right move? Or would you have handled it differently?